All right. Happy New Year, everybody. Thanks for joining me here for this is the year in review live stream, what I'm calling the top 20 episodes. And also, we're going to give out our first ever Moochies. So that'll happen at the end of this broadcast. The thing we're going to do is, as we do with every data-driven episode, is employ the Mooch tally. As you know, the proprietary algorithm that in this case takes into account the number of views per episode, likes, comments, and then there's this intangible element of, let's just call it impact, which is a function of the guest and the subject that we discuss, so forth. So put all that together, you get a numeric value, and we came up with our top 20 list. I think it's a great list. I'm also happy with who wound up getting our first annual Moochies. There are two awards. One's for guest with the most views in an episode, and then the second is guest of the year. So I'd like to thank everybody who contributed to this list in our community tab. There were some great inputs there. And so let's just get moving. I'll try to keep up with the comments. It's going to be tough because I'm kind of a one-armed paper hanger here. I'm fully leveraging all the functionality of StreamYard, which is the streaming app that I use in terms of thumbnails and snippets and so forth and so on. So what we're going to do, we'll go 20-1, and I'll indicate via the thumbnail which episode is in which position, and then we'll run a snippet and I'll throw in some color commentary along the way. Yeah, Mark, you're underdressed. This is a formal event, and as you can see, I do have the good stuff here, and I'm already ahead of you guys probably a little bit. So we'll have a toast at the very end of the live stream. Again, thank you for joining me. So let's start with the channel stats for the year. So overall for 2022, we did 25.9, basically 26 million views. So I was told there'd be no math, but that's more than 2 million views a month. The watch time is an overwhelming, this number I can't even get my head around, 216.6 million minutes, 1.2 million likes. So thanks for that. And we got 148.1 thousand new subscribers. So that puts us up to, as we sit here, 318. We're almost at 319. Maybe overnight we'll get to 319. Very happy to pass 300,000. That was a cool number. We did that a few months ago. And then the month with the most views was February, and that was because of the war. And we'll talk about the specific coverage and the episodes that dealt with that as we go through the rankings here. All right, so let's get right to it. So at number 20 was Secrets of the Military's UFO Program. And here is the snippet. Stand by. I told you this, I was going to be a one-armed paper hanger here. All right, here we go. The Air Force explained that the Project Blue Book findings were a result of three things: a mild form of mass hysteria, individuals who fabricate such reports to perpetuate a hoax or who seek publicity, psychopathological persons, and misidentification of various conventional objects. But while there had been 5 different Air Force officers assigned as the director of Project Blue Book, as with many government agencies, the corporate knowledge was a civilian. In this case, an astrophysicist named J. Allen Hynek. He started his association with Project Blue Book as an associate member of the Robertson panel, fully supportive of the panel's findings. But over time, he became a harsh critic of the Air Force's approach to the data associated with UFOs. Specifically with respect to Project Blue Book, he claimed that neither of the 2 missions of Blue Book, determining if UFOs are a threat to national security and using scientific data gathered by Blue Book, were adequately executed. He said the staff of Blue Book, both in numbers and scientific training, was grossly inadequate. In fact, on Captain Rupert's watch alone, the staff was neck down from 10 to 3. The Blue Book had no scientific dialogue between Blue Book and the outside scientific world,
that the statistical methods employed by Blue Book were nothing less than what Dr. Hynek called a travesty, that there was a lack of attention to significant UFO cases, and too much time was spent on routine cases and on peripheral public relations tasks. Finally, Dr. Hynek said that an impossible load was placed on Blue Book by the almost consistent failure of UFO officers at local air bases to transmit adequate information.
All right, that was number 20. So I'm getting some grief from Sparky here. He says, no Tomcat studs on your shirt below average. That is, I got to take the hit. I do have my wings, Sparky. Come on. Sparky's one of my patrons, EA6, A6 guy, and a good gent all the way around. Welcome, Sparky. All right, let's press on here. So here we go to number 18. So this year we started a thing that I was calling What Makes This Plane Great, which was definitely riffing on my good friend and YouTube mentors, Rick Beato's What Makes This Song Great. But I kind of veered away from that because as a thumbnail and as an episode title, that is like the worst, not best practice. So we're just calling these things what they are. So in this case, the episode was Why the MiG-25 Foxbat Scared the West. So this is number 19. And here is the snippet.
1976, something happened that changed the dynamic completely. During a multi-plane mission off the east coast of Russia, Air Force Lieutenant Viktor Belenko feigned an aircraft malfunction and fell back from the formation before diverting to Japan. He intended to land at Chateau's Air Base, but because his navigation was off and he was low on fuel, he wound up on deck at the civilian airfield at Hakodate. He came in low and hot, fearing he'd be shot down by Japanese air defenses, and his speed caused the jet to skid off the end of the runway into the dirt. As he was taken into custody by Japanese authorities, he asked for asylum in the United States, which he was eventually granted by President Jimmy Carter. He was ultimately hired as a civilian government employee who worked at Top Gun as a lecturer on Soviet Air Force organizational structure and tactics. And although he already had a family in Russia, he got remarried to a music teacher from North Dakota and fathered 2 sons. That marriage later ended in divorce.
So number 18 is here's what it takes to make it from fighter pilot to astronaut. And this one featured my former squadron mate and good friend Scott Kelly. And as you guys may know, Grace is the call sign he used back in those days. Had the record for time on the International Space Station. It was recently broken. But he was a Tomcat pilot with me in VF 143. He was a Nugget and I was what we call a Cat 2. It was my second fighter squadron tour. I was a senior lieutenant and made lieutenant commander at the end of that tour. But Grace and I flew together quite a bit. And in this episode, he recounts one of what he calls the funniest things that ever happened during his time on active duty. So let's show that.
One night, I don't know if you remember this, but we landed, at night on the ship and we were going to hot switch. And I guess your viewers might know what that is. And basically, you chain the airplane down, you keep one of the engines running. The Rio would get out first and get on deck. And then the next Rio would jump in and then the pilot would get out and then the pilot would jump in and then they, close the canopy, start the left engine, and then you take the airplane flying again. And it's dark on the flight deck. It's loud. And I'm sitting there waiting for you to get out. And you get up on the ladder and your understanding was the guy at the base of the ladder was one of the other JOs. Like it was the Rio that you were swapping out with. I don't know who you thought it was. And you're standing on the ladder and he's standing there with his back to the airplane, kind of in your way, so you can't get down. And you put your foot on his helmet and you shove him out of the way by pushing his head. And then the guy turns around and he is in your face and you're in his face, but you think this is like Lieutenant JG Nobody. And it turns out it was Snake, the CO.
It was the skipper.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I could see the moment when you realized that it wasn't who you thought it was. And I lost it.
in my mind's eye, I remember this exact moment. Night hop. We're just ready for mid-rats. I was probably grumpy. And, you know, just like, I just want to get out of the airplane and get our flight gear off and get downstairs and debrief and whatever. Right. So to your point, this person who I cannot see, nor can I see whoever their name is on their helmet or whatever, is just like parked at the base of the ladder, facing the wrong way. Right. Yeah. So I, like you said, I climbed down the ladder.
Yeah.
And I put my foot on their helmet and then gave it a little push.
I think it was more than a little. I think
it was just a little like, right?
It's kind of more like a shove.
And I remember Snake wheeling around and giving me this like WTF, like reaming me.
Like your career is over, look.
Yeah, one of them, right? And I kind of said, hey, you were in the way, sir. You know, I didn't know it was you. A million apologies. And this moved on, right? And so then you hot switched with him, and you know, and we were done. But I remember that. I do remember that now that you mention it. So those were good times in VF-143. The Puking Dogs aboard the USS Eisenhower. I'm thinking that was 91, maybe 92 time frame. So this has been a great year for the channel, and we've introduced some new co-hosts and other personalities that you're going to see again in 23. And one of those guys is the editor-in-chief and founder of a newsletter that I highly recommend you subscribe to called The Merge. And that's Paco Benitez. Paco was a Strike Eagle, not a Super Eagle, a Strike Eagle WISO, weapons system officer. And he's been on the channel a couple of times. And here's the first time he was talking about the rollout of the B-21 and how the Air Force officials and Northrop Grumman wanted to make sure they didn't screw it up like they did the first go around. This is what the thumbnail looked like. And here's the snippet from that one.
History that goes back to the way the B-2 bomber was revealed back in November of 1988. And they actually screwed that up. And we can show some pictures of how they went about it. It's at the same plant. There you go. It occurred at the same plant, a different hangar. And so what they did, if you look at this picture, the stands, or the blue stands, were the kind of uncleared people. So they had a very limited view, which looks very similar to the view that you saw with the B-21 rollout. And all the employees who have been working on the program are on the sides, and so they can see the side and the back. But you notice they had pulled the bomber all the way out of the hangar, and they did not close the airspace above Palmdale. So an Aviation Week reporter rented a Cessna, flew directly over the reveal, and took a bunch of pictures top down of the B-2, and then published it in a magazine article. It's so one of the aspects of the B-2 program, the angular relationships, there was trying to be hold that secret as long as possible, and that made it made a national magazine based on some errors. And so what you saw with the B-21 rollout, it did a few things differently. Number one, they did it at night. Number two, they took all of the phones away from anyone who attended, and they had to be at a very limited angle with only a certain cleared cameras. So no like SLR zoom lens kind of lenses. There's only a few photos that were cleared to be releasable. And the other thing they did is to close down the airspace. So the combination of all of that, there was no way that they wanted to control the narrative, again, because those angular relationships, you could start putting together some things pretty quickly. And I think those will be known when it starts doing its taxi tests. You know, right now, when you saw the reveal, it has three things. It has wings, it's got windows, and it's got wheels.
So you'll see Paco again this year. And again, I highly recommend that you subscribe to the Merge newsletter. It's chock full of information, comes out weekly, and then he pushes special editions when conditions warrant. Another longtime good friend of mine that I was able to get on the channel is Tal Manville, and he revealed what I called Ford class secrets. And this one part, he talked about how they tried to create a what they called a stealth version of the carrier. So let me bring that snippet up.
And this ship theoretically was as stealthy as the DD-1000 that was also being built at the same time.
Like you said, the island is way aft. Here's the flight deck. You would trap, you'd go to an elevator and get off the flight deck. That was the only way off, as you just said. But what I want to point out is here are the catapults, including 2 that are on a lower deck. So a couple of things. You can imagine the noise through the hangar bay with these catapults, which would be, I guess,
Right.
Cat 4, Cat 3, Cat 2, Cat 1. So a really cool look, but not very practical in terms of sortie generation.
Now, when I showed this to the Chief of Naval Operations, Jay Johnson, who followed Admiral Borda, he said, "Manville, you're out of the box. I can certainly say you are out of the box." And he said, "Well, that's the value of it, sir, but it's a lousy aircraft carrier, so, you know, it isn't going any further than that."
Manville, you're out of the box. That's a classic line. All right, we're done with the first 5. This brings us to number 15. So this year, I was able to get my DCS rig, which is sitting just over here, and you guys have seen the Sim Pit episode that the Next Level Racing just gave me in lieu of me profiling it or doing an unboxing episode, a Sim Pit. The other bit of, it's not quite breaking news, but forthcoming content you're going to see is my new computer is going to get here on Tuesday. So this one and I don't want to get all geeky, especially because Sparky will give me grief if I get all, DCS on him. But it has a 4090 card in it and a super high-powered power supply and 64 gigs of RAM and all the stuff that you need to run VR, because people have been pinging me about, hey, why are you doing track IR, do VR? And as I got the VR goggles, so I have these HP Reverb G2 goggles, which my DCS flight instructor and good friend Tricker recommended. So I was running the VR using the 2070 card in my current rig, and it just wasn't awesome in terms of frame rate and resolution and so forth and so on. But it was obvious that the full immersive functionality of VR is worth pursuing. So after some research with some trusted folks and watching a few of the expert videos, episodes on YouTube, I decided to just go ahead and invest in a great computer, the best possible at this time. So I'll be doing some VR episodes coming up. And one of the VR episodes that we're going to do will feature this guy who you guys met this year. Now, first I sat down with Nasty at Tailhook back in September and talked about his career as well as his version, the front seat version of the flat spin episode that we had told the year before after talking to Slammer Richardson at Hook 21. And during the course of that episode, I was sort of talking about, hey, this DCS is awesome. It's the real deal. So he came over to the Moochland facility and sat down, and we wound up doing the episode that has wound up being really, I don't want to say surprisingly popular, but it definitely has resonated with folks. It's the real F-14 pilot flies the DCS Tomcat. So that is number 15 on our lineup here. So let me run this snippet. And this one is actually, it shows Nasty's first ever, no kidding, pass at the ship. And so you can watch him bring it aboard the USS Forrestal.
So scan a VSI, so now
Here it comes.
Yep, ball. Okay, so VSI going a little right. Now we're slow. Now we're fast. Now we're slow. Okay, and I can't even see the ball yet. Keep the flight path director right on the crotch. Coming down a little hard. There's a centered ball. Centered ball, centered ball. Full power. Yeah, it left. Okay.
Nice. You're bored.
Yeah.
Anyway, the bear boss just called down and said, hey, 100, look out to your right. See that center line?
Feel free to use it.
So that is awesome. And so we'll be seeing Nasty again. He's going to do some ACM 1v1 stuff in the VR environment against Su-27s or whatever else we can cook up, MiG-29s. So that's going to be really awesome for DCS and just for people who want to know what was it like in the real airplane. And as you saw in that episode, Nasty's talking about trimming the airplane up, monitoring VSI, the real world scan, all the kind of stuff that is absolutely pure gouge, as we say, for those who want to do it right in DCS, or those who are just interested in how did you actually land the F-14 back in the day. So absolutely good stuff there with Nasty. Another friend of Mooch, and this is kind of the part of the beauty of having a channel that's grown this much and has this much impact. And as I've told you guys before, I'm not going to take that for granted, but we got to meet another good friend of mine who I have known since our days as a midshipman. Slapshot was a year ahead of me. He was class 81. I was class 82. I actually worked for him when he was the editor of the Naval Academy's satirical magazine. It's the Lampoon, which was called The Log. And I was a cartoonist for The Log. And those days were pretty out there. I mean, we did some stuff that was, a lampoon and satirical, but you absolutely couldn't get away with these days. And we like to reminisce about that. But in this case, he came aboard and he's been on the channel 3 times this year. And we're going to have him on another time very soon with some other guys from his days as CEO of VF-14. He has a 3 consecutive miracle story that they executed in Kosovo that is a lot like what happened in Top Gun Maverick. And so that's going to happen in later this year. So look forward to that. But in this case, he went deep on what it takes to be the commanding officer of an aircraft carrier. So in this case, or in this snippet rather, Slapshot talks about why aircraft carrier CEOs need to be aviators.
Officers of aircraft carriers have been aviators since really the beginning of what I would call, the heart of the mission of the aircraft carrier, which for us was World War II. And we've never changed that. So this is the 100-year anniversary of the aircraft carrier going to 1922 with the advent of CV-1 Langley. And the conversation about whether aviators need to be, whether you have to be an aviator to command an aircraft carrier, I would tell you the answer is yes. When the most critical thing happens with F-14s coming in, single engine landing, or some other crazy emergencies happening, if you do not have the ability to think like an aviator, and it doesn't preclude us having helicopter pilots as captains of aircraft carriers, but you've got to have that understanding, that mindset. And then obviously you got to be taught the nuclear power piece. So those are the 2 elements that are required. You got to be an aviator. You have to have commanded a squadron, and you have to have been to nuke power school. And I think we've gotten that right. I think we've proven over the years that it's a pretty high bar to become a commanding officer of an aircraft carrier. And that's why, quite frankly, the selection rate of carrier captains to admiral is the highest of any single position in the Navy.
Love that man, and look forward to having him and his posse on the channel again, as I said, at some point in this year coming up, probably sooner rather than later. So another thing that we've been able to do and really explore this year is profiling great aviators of all services. And what I love about being able to do this is I learn as much as maybe you do after you watch the episode. So I had heard of Robin Olds, but really didn't know him or understand just how incredible he was as far as being a fighter pilot and a leader and a man. So part of my research included reading his memoir, which I highly recommend if you haven't read that. It's a very quick read. It really does. I think he was sort of dictating to his daughter as he was, not quite on his deathbed, but kind of knew the end was getting close. So it's really, it gets you a strong sense of who the man was. So coming in at number 13 is the episode about Robin Olds. And so during this episode, which I directly ripped out of his memoir, there's a dream sequence. And sometimes just like when I'm writing, if I've done something that is maybe bigger than me, you kind of go, wow, I can't believe I did that. And so this particular dream sequence is one of those things. So let's take a look.
Into a deserted ramp. Where is everyone? There's a ladder, but where the hell is my crew? I put my hand gently on my aircraft as the engine ticks. She's cool to the touch. Then I step away. Wait! There's a sound. Singing! It's coming from an old hangar on the edge of the ramp. I walk toward it. I open a door and walk down the hall. I hear voices, laughter, breaking glass. I rub my face. Can it be? My mustache is back. I push quickly through another door, and there they all are. Dear God in heaven, there they are. There's Phil behind the bar. There's Chappie. There's Tex. There's Hub. There's Leon, Tui, Pappy, Jim, Steven. So many familiar faces. I know I'm dreaming, but this is the dream I've wanted. I yell to the group, Olds flight checking in. The singing stops. They turn toward me, a chorus of welcoming voices. Robin, Robin, you made it. You're here. A beer is shoved into my hand. Someone claps me on the back. Faces swarm around. I move down the bar toward an old piano. The piano player stands up and steps towards me. It's my father. Hello, Robbie. He grins. Welcome home. Hello, Dad. I smile shyly. I was a fighter pilot. Yes, son, you still are. I'm proud of you. He sits back down at the piano and says, now teach me some of those new songs, will you? I laugh. Sure thing, Dad, but first let me show you something. I turn toward the group. Hey guys, how about one more MiG sweep? There's a roar of approval, the sound of tables scraping back, the piano starting up, voices singing, pilots cheering. I gulp down my beer, slam the glass onto the bar, and link arms with my men. We turn to crowd around the piano. We sing, we drink, we retell our warrior tales, and we laugh. I have flown home.
So that kind of fully leveraged my post-production abilities there. I think that one came out pretty good. The other thing that happened this year, current events wise, is actually it's nearly a year ago that this happened. This happened very early in the calendar year. There was a mishap aboard the USS Carl Vinson. An F-35 hit the ramp while coming aboard in the daytime. And this was at the tail end of their last line period. They came home a few weeks after that. In fact, I happened to be in San Diego when the ship pulled back into port, and I actually covered that on the channel as well. I was on the flight deck of the Midway as Vinson pulled in. It was a joyous event, as those things always are. So after this mishap happened, I got with particularly Hoser, and who's my trusted dude. You know, he and I go way back. He was CAG Paddles when I was a Cat 2 in that same era that I flew with Scott Kelly. And I was like, is there anything we should do about this? He's like, probably not. Let's not get ahead of the mishap investigation process. I'm like, roger that. And then the footage, the Platt footage leaked, showing the ramp strike, in addition to that other cell phone footage that was shot on the fantail on the stern of the ship. And there was a bunch of bad rumors being circulated about the pilot gender and what had happened and so forth and so on. So mindful not to get ahead of the process, which again, we're talking about, you know, all of us are 05 or 06. Hoser had squadron command. Rowdy Yates joined us. He was the chief test pilot for the X-32 program. You know, this is not a group that's going to take professional responsibility lightly. Although there were some accusations made to that end. But in any case, we gathered twice. Once just to sort of say, okay, here's what we know so far. And the second was to slice and dice in the sort of empirical, if you will. how many guys are on the LSO platform? What is the KS1 pattern? What is precision landing mode? Not what happened in this particular mishap, but what is it? So coming in at number 12 is what was a live stream episode from that event called Another F-35 Crash Video Leaked. Veteran naval aviators analyze the results. And so here's Hoser talking about the just sort of, if he was paddles, how he would have graded that pass. All right, paddles, first thoughts.
All right, this is again a routine, nice day recovery. It is, and this is how it is on the platform. You have the controlling and the backup LSO each have pickle switches. The controlling LSO in front, typically junior in training, and training never ends. And even at this point in their deployment, the backup LSO, typically a team leader. The air wing LSO, CAG LSO is there on the platform, and may or may not be on the pickle, but it's certainly there to supervise. An LSO team will have, in almost all situations, a representative LSO from each type of air wing aircraft. So in this air wing, obviously F-35, FA-18, EF Super Hornet, E-2 Hawkeye, and EA-18 Growler. So there's probably one of each. So there's a subject matter expert nearby when you need them. In this plat tape, we see what I would characterize as in the middle. The first second, the aircraft is in a drift left and settle condition, and LSO says right for lineup as the aircraft drifts left. Now, this is an imperative call. The pilot must respond, and so the pilot does. Another voice jumps in, power, and even before the word power is out of his mouth, he switches it to wave off. You see the W on the bottom of the screen. That means the wave off lights have been actuated, and now it's wave off, and then burner calls. The burner calls lead me to believe that a burner wave off is a valid command, if you will, for the F-35. Not all aircraft had that. U-2, flying the F-14A, as we discussed earlier, Mooch, in a previous episode. Burner was not something you wanted to give because of the way the nozzles behaved. In subsequent models of the Tomcat, in the Hornet, and I'm guessing here because I don't know the F-35. What I detect, I think it's all of us do, is the fear in the voice of the LSO here. There's wave offs occur at sea every day for a variety of reasons. This was not a routine wave off.
So I'm going to reconvene with those two guys once the signed out final report is on the streets. I have been in comms with the air boss, as you guys know from a couple of episodes, including the one that was cross-streamed or simulcast from a panel I moderated at the Naval Institute that featured the air boss, Admiral Loisel, who's N98, and PEO carriers. We asked the air boss, when are we going to know what's up? So my understanding is and this isn't the mishap investigation report, that's never publicly available. It's the JAGMAN. It's being redacted by the JAGs, and we're just waiting for that to happen. So this has taken a long time. The timeline is supposed to be a JAGMAN is on the streets that is FOIA-able 30 days after the mishap. So that would have been in February. And here we are. It's basically, a year later, and we still don't have anything. Now, in defense of the Navy officials, they didn't start the clock until the airplane was recovered from the bottom of the South China Sea. And that's because there are 3 black boxes on the F-35, and that all of that information was necessary in the findings of the mishap board. So yes, we're not going to get in front of the process. I will be candid and say that we heard some things at Tailhook that are eye-opening, to put it mildly. And we'll be reviewing those things in detail once we're allowed to talk about the mishap. So that's something else that we'll look forward to, and I'll reconvene with Rowdy and Hoser in such time as it's appropriate. Okay, so that gets us down to number 11. And again, this is part of the fun is I get to leverage my network, and sometimes this is guys I flew with, and sometimes in this case, it's the dad of a guy I flew with. So I had both Flats and Flats Senior on the channel this year. Flats Junior, Seamus, who I was a RAG instructor with, was the episode where he was part of Task Force 20, or he supported Task Force 20 in the search for Saddam by taking 5 of his airplanes off of the Independence and or I guess it was Kitty Hawk, and operating out of Sheikh Issa. And then, but as I was talking to him, he's like, well, would you like to talk to my dad about when he landed the C-130 aboard Forrestal? I'm like, of course, yeah. I'm like, is he willing to tell the story? He goes, yeah, he would sure like to tell it. So this is one of those where you're like, I think that story's maybe been told plenty on YouTube. And as I did a sort of poor man's search, the story was out there, but I don't think it was tailored in a way that that got some of the elements like tightened up. And so I'm pleased to say this episode did really well. In fact, as we sit here, it's almost to 400,000 views. So this was, here's how a fighter pilot landed a cargo plane on a carrier, conversation with Rear Admiral Jim Flatley. And here is the snippet where he talks about how they approached the ship and what the speeds were. So again, let me do the finger fire here. So here we go.
7 landings, the full stops of the second time out with the intention of stopping. All of those were, of course, on the axial deck at 3 knots above stall on approach.
So what was that? What was that speed, roughly?
Well, at first approach, 79 knots with 40 knots of wind over the deck.
So your closure is minimal with
absolutely.
The ship.
That's why we stopped in 279 feet the first time.
Okay. Would paddles give you a cut, or you go into beta before you cross the ramp? How did that go? Because that sounds kind of crazy.
We did take a cut, and I'm guessing Jerry gave us the cut right at the ramp, but it had to be a little bit before that, because we consistently touched down 50 feet from the ramp, which you don't do normally in your carrier air wing ops. All of us are, that first wire is 120 feet up the deck or something.
I like his laugh when I say that sounds kind of crazy. Yeah, you think? So to have a legend like that on the channel, it's just amazing stuff. Again, I sometimes I can't believe what we're able to do here. All right, so we're up. We're down to the top 10 here. So here's another one that sort of surprised me how it performed. So Pop Gun was a satirical video that we made back at the tail end of my time in VF-32, which was my first tour. So the movie Top Gun came out, as I've described a number of times on the channel, when I was in that tour, sort of the middle. In fact, my wife Carrie and I were dating at the time. And so we just kind of had this idea of, why don't we get a local video crew and we'll just write a script. And the skipper approved of it. In fact, the skipper put the spurs to us when we were having trouble getting it done. And I left the squadron before it got finished. So Sarge Zadow who has a key role in this, it was the guy who saw that to the finish line. John Von Goren plays the lead guy, and Nimrod, and unfortunately, John passed away a few years after this while he was traveling to the West Coast. He was found dead in a BOQ room in Memphis. So we lost John. He's buried in the columbarium at the Naval Academy, and he was a super guy. So again, this one is it does my heart good, the number of views this one has had, because it was in the lost sort of stuff file. So here's the snippet from this one. This is where Nimrod goes to the CO's house to sort of get some encouragement from him about whether or not he should continue with Pop Gun.
Nimrod, how nice to see you.
Is Commander around, ma'am?
Yeah, he's around back working on the car.
I'll go on back there.
Okay.
Hello, Nimrod.
Commander?
What brings you out this way?
I think you know, sir.
Well, I think I might be troubling you. Sit down, son. You know, I was very close to your father. He was one of the finest gentlemen, best fighter pilots I was ever associated with.
Excuse me, sir. My father's still alive, and he works in a hardware store.
Well, whatever.
Sir, I suspect I'm going to be thrown out of Pop Gun for sure now.
I wouldn't say that.
What do you mean, sir?
Well, Nimrod, you know what I've always done to get me through a tough situation?
Drawn on faith, courage?
No, Nimrod. I do a book report for extra credit.
So again, that was kind of fun to get that one another life in the YouTube ecosystem. And some of the jokes don't hold up, but some of them do. And so there you go. At number 9 was a low point in an otherwise great year. As you guys know, my mom passed away in late July from a cerebral hemorrhage. So part of the I don't know how to put this, the luxury of having a channel is I can do a tribute, and I was able to do one on her, and the reception I got, I will say, not just was a great outpouring of sympathy to me, but I can tell you your sentiments were shared with my entire family, and so I thank everybody who wrote kind remarks and who reached out to me directly and said that they were moved by this episode. So this is, it was called The Hardest Video I Ever Had to Make. So here's my part of it where I'm talking about how my mom sort of had this ability to make a home wherever it was that we went. His military career, Mom served as his wingman in every billet, from squadron pilot, where she had to conjure up the strength on a daily basis that there wouldn't be a black sedan parked in the driveway when there was a knock on the door, to assistant naval attaché, where she was a de facto diplomat who shaped the impressions of the U.S. with allies and potential enemies alike, to commanding officer, where she was responsible for the morale and well-being of 30-some officer spouses and 3 times as many enlisted spouses. Over 30 years, the family lived in 12 different homes, spanning the globe from Southern California to the Netherlands, which equates to a move every 2.5 years. 4 of those tours had 13-month periods where Mom was a single parent to 3 boys, including when we lived in Kirkwood near Grandma and Grandpa Hazy, while Dad was flying A4s out of Chu Lai and Da Nang in Vietnam. Wherever we lived, Mom doggedly led the effort behind creating a quote-unquote normal for us. Whether we lived on base or rented nearby, she applied her sophisticated but budget-conscious decorating style to the place, putting up curtains or painting walls or transforming weed-choked gardens into yard of the month contenders. Always leave a place better than you found it, she'd say. So the thing that was ironic about the timing of her passing was a few weeks before, she had come out of a malaise that she'd been in for some months, helping to find assets for this episode, which comes in at number 8, which was the chat with my dad, the Marine Corps TAC pilot. And Carrie shot a photo that I don't have queued up here, but it's her sitting next to my computer watching me post-produce that episode, and she's got this big smile on her face. But she dug deep into the archives of their home down there in Florida, these, old school drawers, photo albums with photos just pouring out of them, and found a lot of these key images that we used in this episode. I will tell you, this episode with my dad, which again, a chat with my dad, the Marine Corps TAC pilot, was educational for all of the boys, my brothers and I. We hadn't heard this story end to end. We'd heard snippets, but some of the circumstances, how he got into the Marine Corps, we'd never really connected the dots in the way that he explained it during that episode. And just the chronology of his career, he'd never sat down and told us all of those stories. So, the importance of this episode, beyond the fact that it did well, performance-wise, it was 200 and some odd thousand views. And again, I heard from a lot of people, he heard from a lot of people, old squadron mates and long lost friends. And that's amazing when that happens. But it's a family archive now. It's a record that we otherwise wouldn't have had. Here is the snippet from that episode.
Takeoff with JATO, jet assisted takeoffs, and you would get the airplane rolling at 80 knots, and you would punch the firing button and look up in your mirror, and you should have 2 blue lights back there of the rockets going. And if you didn't have 2 in there, you were going to have to eject, no doubt about it. And many guys tried to fly the airplane with only getting 1 fire, and nobody made it. You would crash off the end of the runway, and so you were wise to eject before that happened, because if crash off the end of the runway was kind of a fatal thing.
So coming back, did you take arrested landings?
All the landings were arrested. The cable was located a little way down the runway, so you did not fly into the cable. You landed with your hook down, and it dragged down the runway a bit before it hit the cable. And that mobile arresting gear, MOOCHIES, would then you to a stop, and they'd taxi off, and away you'd go.
So that episode was amazing. We did it basically in 2 sessions, each lasting about 3 hours down there at their house in Florida. And that's, the last fond memory I have of my mom is her involved in finding all the cool photos that we were able to use in that episode. So that brings us to number 7 on the top 20 for 2022. So this year was highlighted by the release of Top Gun Maverick finally, and kind of made a cottage industry out of trying to guess what the movie was about based on the trailers. I did half a dozen episodes trying to guess different things, including how the Tomcat was involved. Turns out I was like 80% right with the Tomcat's involvement. As some of you know, I went up, Paramount sent me up to New York a month early to see the movie. I was prevented from reviewing it until mid-April, and then did that episode. And like I've done with the original Top Gun or other military movies, sort of analyzed various parts of it. And in this case, I did an episode called The Real Truth about the final Top Gun Maverick dogfight. And this is one where I was able to employ DCS as well as the whiteboard to talk about the split throttle and what the airplane really does in that. So let's take a look at the snippet where I am using DCS to show how it really behaves.
Go to the training aids. As documented in the Goose's Death episode many moons ago, the F-14 had a tendency to flat spin under the right conditions, or let's just say the wrong conditions. And those wrong conditions were low airspeed, high angle of attack, and asymmetric thrust, generally due to a compressor stall in one of the two engines. And the reason the airplane could flat spin was because 25% of the lift came from the fuselage, which we used to call the tennis court because it's big and wide. And also the engines are pretty far apart. If you look at a Hornet compared to a Tomcat or a Super Hornet, those engines are close together compared to the Tomcat. And the engines were not parallel. They were canted slightly outward, in fact, 4.5 degrees apart. So if a Tomcat crew lost an engine at high angles of attack and low airspeed, and the pilot didn't counter that yaw rate, the airplane would get into a flat spin very quickly. So that's what makes this split throttle move problematic for any Tomcat crews that watch that sequence. Now, for the screenwriters, I'm sure they assumed that all of those moves would cause the airplane to pirouette, meaning that if you split the throttles, generating this kind of thrust, and you added to that full left rudder and full left stick, that would cause the airplane to do this. But that's not what it does at all. So let's go to the DCS simulator and demonstrate what actually happens when you input those controls.
Okay, for the purposes of this demo, we're going to assume the Tomcat has wings in auto. Just puts them about there. Also, I have roll SAS off. Roll stability is in the off position, which we would normally have for any maneuvering of the airplane. So here we are down low. And this is a 1v0, meaning I don't actually have a bandit behind me. But we'll demo the split throttle move and see how it goes. All right, so staging burner. And we're full burner. Okay, into the vertical. Nice smooth pull to 15 units. And as the VDI and the HUD flip-flop, I'll do the move. All right, so splitting the throttles, full rudder.
So at this point, you can see the input of those controls just causes the airplane to roll. It doesn't cause the nose to move to the left at all. So this isn't a pirouette. Now we can see it from the external view. Burner's lit, pull into the pure vertical. There's the input of the controls, and the airplane simply rolls in the vertical. It does not do a pirouette. And as discussed, if you were to do this at higher angles of attack, meaning a slower airspeed, you'd risk putting the airplane immediately into a flat spin.
So it's fun to use DCS in an episode. And as you guys who watch the channel frequently know, I did that with the Casey Campbell episode with the A-10, and I've used it a couple of times, the P-51 episode, which was one of the What Makes This Airplane Great episodes. And I'm going to do some more coming up. We got F-8, we've got F-4, got the Corsair in the wake of Devotion. And if you haven't seen Devotion yet, you're missing out. Make sure you go see that. A great movie, and cool flying scenes. But incorporating DCS in those episodes like that was really a fun thing to do. And I think it was a value add in terms of explaining things. So one of the, I'll call it a highlight, it was a dubious circumstance this year, was the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And as, again, fans of the channel know, we've covered this a number of different ways when conditions warrant, particularly with a focus on the air war. So it wasn't too long into the war. It was a Saturday morning, if I remember correctly, when a meme popped up of the kill tally of this pilot they were calling the Ghost of Kyiv. And it just struck something in me. I was like, this is just amazing. And it seemed potentially unlikely, but possible based on the nature of that opening salvo of the war, which is, it was kind of high entropy. You know, you could imagine a Ukrainian MiG-29 driver just launching alone and unafraid, getting some quick kills, landing, getting rearmed, refueled, coming back up for just a total VFR, kind of a visual war, and winding up with 6 kills at the end of the day. That struck me as something that was possible. And I will be honest, I was biased to believe, because as a guy who spent his young life toe-to-toe with the Russians during the Cold War, you know, I'm not a huge fan, I'll be honest. And so, you know, there's a lot of controversy domestically about our support of Ukraine and how much money and so forth and so on. I mean, we can get divided about everything these days, as we know. But in terms of where I come down, this is sort of a fundamental good versus evil. I think President Zelensky has done a masterful job in terms of the optics, because everybody was convinced that he was this lightweight actor who was going to flee as soon as he could. And you remember that opening line, they said, the Biden administration said, hey, can we get you out of the country? He says, I don't need a ride, I need ammo. That's one for the ages, right? So jury's out, war is ongoing, as we've covered most recently with that episode with David Axe. But I did do a sort of a legend of the ghost of Kyiv. In terms of numbers, this one went to 2 million in about 6 days. So not only did it strike a chord with me, it struck a chord with a lot of folks. So let me play the snippet from that episode. At the end of the day, word had it he had downed 2 Su-35s, 1 Su-27, 1 MiG-29, and 2 Su-25s. 6 Russian military aircraft bent on wreaking havoc on his Ukrainian homeland. He had become an ace in a day, the first in Europe since World War II. So a lot of folks were hard over that this was fake and why am I, you know, playing into this propaganda and that sort of thing. So what I will say to that valid criticism is, as soon as the real story came out, we covered it. This is what people leave out, and when they continue to troll me on Ghost of Kyiv in the comments, you know, again, it's a cheap shot at this point, because as soon as the Ukrainian Air Force came out and said, here's what's really up, we were all over it. And so here's a snippet from the correction episode, if you will. Last episode, titled The Ghost of Kyiv Revealed, contains some information found in a Times of London feature. Subsequent to that episode, I was made aware of a post on the Ukrainian Air Force's official Facebook page that states in part, quote, "Hero of Ukraine Stepan Terabalka is not the ghost of Kyiv, and he did not hit 40 planes. On March 13th, 2022, Major Stepan Terabalka was heroically killed in an air battle with the dominant forces of the Russian occupiers," end quote. The post goes on to say that the ghost of Kyiv, a superhero created by Ukrainian citizens, isn't one guy, but actually represents all of the fighter pilots of the Ukrainian Air Force. I pinned the Ukrainian Air Force statement to the top of the comments of the revealed episode, but wanted to make sure you were all aware of that statement, which is the first official word on the topic since the legend of the Ghost of Kyiv emerged a few days after the invasion. So there you go. We covered both sides of the story, and we will continue to do so as information becomes available. But again, I'm unflinchingly biased towards the Ukrainians in the case of this particular conflict. The other thing that we did this year as a function of our Ukrainian coverage was we became friends with Justin Bronk. So when the war started, my good friend Alex Hollings at the Sandbox did a story that was riffing on some of Justin's early writings in the war. So I read that, and then I did an episode which comes up later in the list called Exposed. And I found Justin at RUSI, at the RUSI website, the Royal United Services Institute. I usually call it Uniform Services Institute, but it's United Services Institute, where he's a senior fellow in residence. And so over the course of the year, he was on 6 times, including one of the early episodes here, which comes in at number 5, which was deep intel. Let me find the thumbnail here. Deep intel on Russia's air ops against Ukraine. And in this episode, we truly leveraged his expertise in a big way, talking about the different weapons that they're using, and the stuff that they are flying on the or carrying on the airplane. So here he is talking about some of their SEAD assets.
The KH-31P, or the in NATO code word Krypton, is a relatively old. I mean, I think it was designed in the 80s, but it's an anti-radiation missile derived from an anti-ship missile. It's pretty fast off the rail. It picks up to Mach 3 or a little above, which makes sense. And it's the rough equivalent to the AGM-88 HARM. So it has in this configuration has an anti-radiation seeker. Although it's generally configured for going after NATO SAMs, so things like Patriot, which given that the 3 different frequency band seeker heads that can be fitted have to be changed at the factory, it can't be changed at the airbase or in flight. It's a relatively inflexible weapon, and it probably wasn't designed really to go up, or at least most of its capabilities weren't designed to go up against Russian-made systems. But clearly they're employing them quite a lot. Sorry, there's wreckage of those quite distinctive missile bodies with the 4 little intakes for the propulsion system have been found in a few places around Ukraine. But of course, as with most anti-radiation missiles, they're good for suppression, because any SAM system that detects one of these being fired, and they have a pretty big signature, will have to either turn off, in other words, deprive the anti-radiation seeker of that radar signal that it needs to home in on, or if it keeps going in order to continue prosecuting an engagement, then that missile will continue to home in and will potentially hit. But basically, if you fire it at standoff, you can push them out to 80 or even 100 kilometers theoretically, but the SAM operator, particularly in mobile SAMs like the SA-8 or SA-11, which the Ukrainians are getting a lot of use out of, the operator will generally have time to turn the radar off if fired from a long distance and move.
So you will definitely be seeing Justin on the channel again as the weeks and months go on here. You can't get that kind of expertise from any other source. I'm just, the guy is really a resource that's really, really vital in these days. So the other amazing thing with respect to Justin this year is he flew to the States. He was doing sort of a whirlwind tour. So we got to connect when he was in Washington, D.C., and we sat down on a brisk Sunday morning at a coffee shop on H Street, right downtown Northwest. And my wife, Carrie, was the camera person. And we did another episode that I titled The Real Truth About the Air War Over Ukraine. So here's the snippet from that one.
Of why should the US in particular keep supplying Ukraine? It's interesting that it's becoming more of a partisan position, having not been up to now. Interesting discussions even with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs over the last few days. The thing that, at least from an external perspective, would be the US is never going to find a more efficient use from its own self-interest point of view of defense spending than supplying Ukraine, in the sense that they're getting an almost, leaving aside the fact that it's the right thing to do to help defend a country that's been overtly and nakedly attacked with great brutality, and the fact that defending the rules-based international order, which the reason the Russians and the Chinese hate it so much is because it explicitly benefits America. Yes, it defends all of that, but leaving that aside, if you just strip it down to naked self-interest on why should we spend defense money on this or that, you're never going to get a more efficient opportunity to write down one of your 2 major peer competitors, at least in the nuclear space for the Russians, and a huge spoiler for any ability to focus on the Chinese going forward. You know, if the Russians don't lose, then actually America still has to keep forces in major form in Europe. America still has to worry about that threat there that it's treaty bound to defend. And so for the cost of sending continued support to Ukraine, both in terms of money but also munition stocks, I would just say you're never going to get a more efficient way to write down for the next 5 to 10 years one of your key strategic adversaries without a single American life being threatened.
So that logic, put a pin in it. We're going to have this conversation in the weeks to come. So I thought that was a brilliant statement. And then to, again, meet Justin in person. The other thing that surprised me is he's as tall as I am. I'm 6'5", so he's a strapping young lad and wise beyond his young years. So it's been an amazing ride with Justin, and a privilege to have his expertise featured on the channel this year. Another episode, so we're down to the top 3. Another episode was a function of reference from a good friend of mine, a guy named Kevin Maurer, who's a great writer. All of Kevin's works are amazing. I became aware of Kevin when he was the co-author of a book called No Easy Day, which was about the Bin Laden raid. It was the first expose about life in a Tier 1 command and at DevGru, SEAL Team 6. Kevin is a super sharp guy. We keep in close touch. So he was about to publish this book called Damn Lucky, and it was about the air war over Europe. And so it's like I was talking about with Admiral Flatley landing on the C-130. I'm like, I think that's been done, right? Isn't that air war? It's like Memphis Belle. And what don't we know about the air war? Again, fully respecting the effort that the Greatest Generation did there, and the fact that that's where the most casualties were in any theater of the war, where it was in the air war over Europe. And so he said, hey, I can get you with this guy, Lucky Luckadoo. He's 100 years old. And so, again, being, not always considered, I'm like, how sentient is he? He's 100. And so Kevin said, he's amazing. He's great. I'm like, so you'll be there, right? And so you can help him along. He's like, no, I'm just going to tee you up with him and you guys have at it. So as anybody who's seen that episode knows, Lucky Luckadoo is an amazing guy at age 100. He can run circles around me, and he brought out elements of the air war over Europe that I had never heard. And I'm quite proud of the fact that this episode has had more than 500,000 views. So coming in at number 3 is watch this 100-year-old badass B-17 pilot describe flying into hell. So here is Lucky talking about part of the way that the Luftwaffe would come at him.
Technique the Luftwaffe utilized, which was most effective, was to get out in front of the formation, just in line abreast, in a straight line, 25 to 30 aircraft, ME-109s, Focke-Wulf 190s, ME-110s, which were rocket ships, and they would fly directly through the formation, flying chicken. And the reason they attack us from that vantage point was that there was a void directly at level altitude where the top turret guns could not come down below and the ball turret guns could not come above a certain level. So in that void, they attempted to get into that slot and just fly directly through the formation, fishtailing as they did, and spraying our entire formation with machine guns, 20-millimeter cannons, and rockets.
Again, what a gift to have somebody like that on the channel. The Greatest Generation label is not a cliche. It's very accurate. So if you haven't seen that episode, check it out. It's really, really amazing. All right, top 2. So both of these episodes were north of 1 million views, and that's a number I still have trouble getting my head around, even though I've had 7 or 8 episodes since I started this channel about 2 years ago. And it really hit our stride about a year and a half ago. April of 21 is when we had that Goose's death episode that took off, and everything else has been a rocket ship since then. But when you hit 1 million, it's a hard number. It's a bucket list number. So I've already mentioned this episode during the live stream. This was riffing on Justin's stuff and then throwing in my own color commentary. But this was the first statement that I had about the Russian performance in the invasion of Ukraine. So this one was called Exposed. And here is a snippet from that episode. The invasion started with cruise missile attacks on the 24th of February, designed to blind the Ukrainian Air Force by taking out ground-based early warning radars and also cratering runways and taxiways at its major air bases. Those strikes also hit several Ukrainian long-range S-300P surface-to-air missile batteries. At that point, the expectation was that the Russian Aerospace Forces, which goes by the abbreviation VKS, which in Russian is Vostochno-Komishyskie Sili, would have mounted large-scale strike operations to destroy the balance of the Ukrainian Air Force. The plan was to quickly flow from the north and the east through the separatist regions, joining up with separatist forces, basically splitting the country in half along the Dnieper River. At the same time, the Russian military would create a land bridge along the southern coastline, linking up with Russian forces in the Transnistria region, which is the eastern edge of Moldova, and that would cut off any supply routes coming from the Black Sea. Putin's expectation was by this point the government in Kyiv would collapse and Zelensky and his ministers would go into exile, and the western half all the way to Lviv would surrender or be easy pickings as they got pushed out by the Russians. Putin would put in a puppet government, not unlike Belarus, and it would be mission accomplished. So far, that's not what's happened. So coming in at number one, should be no surprise if you follow the channel at all. This one is north of 1.3 million views. I was introduced to this aviator by one of my patrons, Joe. Got a virtual introduction, and it took us a while to connect because her schedule is super busy these days. But this was the number one episode for 2022. And it's how Killer Chick got her battle-damaged A-10 home. And it features Colonel Casey Campbell. And here is Casey getting the training aids and talking to us about the A-10. The training aids here. Walk us through the A-10 for those who aren't familiar.
This is my favorite view, right? I think straight on right here, if I can get it right.
The enemy's least favorite view.
Yeah, I know. So that I think the awesome thing that I love about the A-10 is, well, obviously the 30 millimeter Gatling gun, but the airplane is built around the gun. So the gun itself is 19 feet long, and you can't really see the wheel on this one. But if you look at an A-10 straight on, the gun is going to be the very center of the airplane. So where we point is where we shoot, which means that the nose wheel is actually slightly offset. So the next time you see an A-10 out there, you'll see that the nose wheel is offset. But pretty incredible airplane. I mean, really designed for the close air support mission. Our fuel tanks are enclosed in protective foam lining. So the fuel tanks are on the wing sections are in protective foam lining to prevent fire after battle damage. Obviously, we have two very reliable engines. We like to poke at our single seat fighter engine friends that we have two. They're very reliable, very durable. And then all of our flight controls are built with redundant backup systems. So left and right hydraulic lines are separated throughout the aircraft. Awesome airplane, has 11 stations, 11 pylons to carry weapons. So we can occasionally get that full loadout with a full gun and then full load of weapons with whether it's AIM-9s for, we'll call it defense of an air-to-air mission, rockets, Maverick missiles, bombs. Now with the upgraded A-10C, we'll carry laser-guided bombs, GPS-guided bombs. But in the early days, it was just dumb bombs. And then we can also carry, which you can kind of see over here, is an electronic countermeasure pod. So full loadout makes us very heavy, talking like 47,000 pounds of an airplane fully loaded, which in the summers in Afghanistan or Las Vegas at Nellis Air Force Base makes us pretty heavy rolling down that runway. So this is a 30 millimeter bullet. This is a target practice round. You can tell by the blue tip. But this is, and it's inert, just for the record. But this is what a 30 millimeter round looks like. I mean, the shells, so this, when we shoot the 30 millimeter round, the shells come back in the airplane. So we end up recycling the shells, but pretty awesome. There are several different types of rounds that we can carry. So we've got essentially a high explosive incendiary round. We have the target practice rounds. We have an armor piercing round as well. And we do also have what we call a combat mix, where we'll combine different types of rounds, but very effective. We shoot about 70 rounds per second in the A-10. In combat, maybe a couple second burst is really all that you need. So we're not going to pull that trigger for very long. It's not very good for the gun. It actually heats up the gun barrels, makes it a little bit less accurate, but a couple second pull is all you need.
So that is money content. Again, that kind of expertise is just what a gift to have folks like Colonel Campbell on the channel providing us with that kind of information. You'll see Casey again in March. She's going to be touring in support of her forthcoming leadership book. So I hope to get together with her in person when she's on the DC stop of her book tour. So keep you guys posted on that. So it is now time for the Moochies. And so the first one is really no surprise because it's given to the guest with the most views. So getting that Moochie is KC, and well-deserved. I'm really proud that she was able to garner that kind of impact for that great information. So congratulations, KC. So Casey was going to be on the channel to give an acceptance speech, but she's out of her home today. In fact, she's skiing with her family. So this Moochie is actually an actual award that looks like this. It's etched glass or acrylic. So that'll be on her I Love Me shelf behind her, where next to the airplane. All right, now for the big one, which is the guest of the year. And there were a couple of contenders here. Runner-ups were the likes of Nasty Manazar and Ted Carter, but the winner, who was on 6 times and yielded more than 1.4 million views, is our good friend Justin Brunk. So congratulations to Justin. And again, we'll get this award to him over in his domicile over in London. So I was able to get Justin. Here is his acceptance speech.
Hey, Mooch. Thanks very much for the award of a Moochie. I'm very flattered. It's been lovely having these sort of fascinating chats, and thank you for the opportunity and the platform to have these chats over the year. And it's been really nice, I must say, reading some of the lovely comments from folks. Shame that the backdrop is such a brutal invasion and all this suffering, but it's great coming to the end of the year, seeing Ukrainians doing better than we could have dared hope back in February, and it's been nice to have been able to provide analysis and hopefully add some value in the backdrop, and looking forward to more conversations in 2023 and more Ukrainian successes in 2023. I guess Happy New Year, everybody.
So Happy New Year, everybody. Indeed. Thank you guys for joining me for this. Has been a longer than I had planned live stream, almost an hour and 20 minutes. Thanks for hanging in there. Here's hoping wherever you are, you're safe, warm with friends, and you are able to celebrate in peace and security. I look forward to continuing our journey in 2023. Thanks to my patrons, subscribers, and casual viewers. Here's to a great 2023. And yes, this was a gift from my son, the good stuff. All right, guys. I look forward to talking to you again very soon.